In 2035, the Hermes crew reaches Mars for a 31 solar day expedition. On day 18, they explore Acidalia planitia and botanist Mark collects samples for chemoanalysis. At that moment, system operator Beth receives a dust storm warning from the computer and tells the crew to come back to the surface habitat called HAB. While watching the clouds approaching, Mark and chemist Alex say they should wait it out, but Commander Melissa predicts it'll be very destructive, so she orders everyone to evacuate. Once everyone is suited up, they open the door of the HAB and immediately get hit by the dust storm. They make an effort to push through and Mark stays at the end of the line to close the door. The storm may tip their Mars Ascent Vehicle or MAV soon, so they need to hurry, although Mark thinks they can anchor it using cables in the rover. Suddenly, the satellite dish is blown off and everyone has to duck to dodge it. However, Mark isn't fast enough and the dish hits him. As Mark is sent flying into the darkness, the computer receives a warning of a suit breach. They can't find him on the scanner and can't detect his vitals either. Melissa sends the rest of the crew to the MAV while she stays to search a little longer. Surgeon Chris points out that with a suit breach, Mark must be dead by now, not to mention the storm is starting to trip the MAV. Melissa has no choice but to join her crew and authorize the launch. The MAV leaves Mars while the crew grieves for their lost friend. Meanwhile, the administrator of NASA, Teddy, appears at a press conference to announce that the Mars team is coming back without one of the astronauts. However, on Mars, the storm is finally over and Mark wakes up when his suit alerts him that his oxygen level is critical. A piece of metal attached to the satellite through wire has pierced his suit but has also kept the hole covered, which explains why he's alive. After cutting the wire, Mark rushes back to the HAB and painfully removes the metal rod. However, there's still a piece inside. He uses forceps to remove that piece before closing up the wound. Next, he logs into the computer and starts a video log to record the details of what happened in case he doesn't make it. Since the antenna broke, he has no way to contact NASA and a next manned mission will come to Mars in 4 years, but he doesn't think he can survive until then. While another storm appears outside, Mark spends most of the day resting, but eventually he gets bored. He starts cleaning up the HAB and putting his friends' things in labeled boxes. Watching all their pictures makes him decide he won't die there. In the morning, he organizes all the food, including what they saved for Thanksgiving, which has some potatoes that give him an idea. Using his training as a botanist, Mark starts working on making a greenhouse inside the HAB with Mars soil and the crew's bathroom waste as fertilizer. He plants all the potatoes, but they'll need lots of water to grow. Thankfully, he has the tools and the parts to create a device that can burn leftover rocket fuel and transform it into water. The first time he turns it on, the machine catches on fire, so Mark has to fix his calculations before trying again while wearing protective gear. This time it works fine, and now he has water for himself and for his garden. As days pass, Mark keeps working hard and records everything on daily video logs. He takes care of the garden and does maintenance on the solar panels outside. On day 54, he's delighted to discover the plants are actually growing. On Earth, Director of Mars missions Vincent tells Teddy they should already organize a new trip instead of waiting 4 years since the last one wasn't completed. Teddy disagrees, saying that if they send a ship now, they'll put Mark's body on display and the public won't like it. However, Vincent points out they could use that in their favor if they frame the mission as going back to retrieve the body for the family. Minutes later, in the Texas Space Center, an operator receives a message from Vincent asking her to search some specific coordinates on Mars. She uses the satellite to check the area and is shocked to discover there have been changes at the HAB. After an emergency call, Teddy, Vincent, and the director of media, Annie, rush to the Space Center to see it with their own eyes. They conclude Mark is alive and begin arguing on how to proceed, since the general public won't react well to hearing they left an astronaut behind and the crew will probably feel guilty. Teddy thinks Mark won't survive without food, and Vincent worries about Mark's psychological state because he probably thinks he was abandoned by his peers. The next day, Teddy appears in another press conference announcing that Mark is alive, but he can't answer any questions because he lacks more information. The crew isn't informed of any of this yet. On day 70, Mark concludes he needs to start thinking long-term. The team that will arrive in 4 years will land 3,200 kilometers away from his HAB, so he'll need to find a way to get there. The first problem is the only working rover, which can reach a maximum distance of 35 kilometers before it has to be recharged. The second problem is that the trip would take 50 days to complete, so he would be living in a rover with minimal life support. By taking pieces from the rover that was destroyed by the storm, Mark manages to double the battery life of the working rover. He does a test run in the middle of the night and notices how cold it gets, but turning on the heater would consume too much battery life. When he returns to the HAB, he concludes he must dig out the radioisotope thermoelectric generator, which is a dangerous task because it's full of plutonium. By working carefully, he manages to retrieve the generator without any accidents and connects it to the rover. On Earth, Vincent appears at a press conference to explain Mark's activities since the satellite footage is public. He explains Mark probably wants to go to the landing site, but if NASA could communicate with him, they'd tell him to wait until they rescue him. Afterward, Teddy scolds him for saying that on camera since they still don't know if rescuing Mark is possible. He also wants to send a supply probe to Mars, so the team tells him building and sending it would take 9 months. Teddy orders everyone to work overtime and get it done in 3. Flight director Mitch insists they should tell the mission crew about this, but Teddy refuses to do so until they can be sure Mark can be rescued. On day 79, Mark finally gets grown potatoes from his garden. He replants the small ones and saves the big ones for his food supply. Then he looks at the map while trying to think of a way to fix the communication issue and finally gets an idea. He gets on the rover and drives for a while in a direction that confuses Vincent at first. However, he gets excited when he also looks at a map and realizes where Mark is going. Moments later, Mark is digging in the sand to pull out the Pathfinder probe, which fell silent in 1997. He puts it on the rover and takes it back to the hab to start working on repairing it. At the same time, Vincent rushes to meet with the engineering team and brings out the Pathfinder replica so they can program a connection. Eventually, both Pathfinders make contact and the Earth team receives images from Mars. Mark rushes to put up a sign asking if they can see him plus 2 more signs that say yes and no. The team moves the camera to make it point at yes and Mark celebrates. Now he needs to figure out a way to have complicated science conversations with just a camera and signs. He grabs Beth's computer and finds a chart with alphanumeric units, which he sets up around Pathfinder using signs again. The NASA engineers quickly catch on to what he's doing and repeat the process in their lab. Once everything is ready, both sides can start sending messages to each other. Mark tells them how he survived and makes sure to point out it wasn't the crew's fault. Then NASA begins sending him instructions on how to hack the rover so it can talk to Pathfinder by modifying the broadcasting frequency. Mark follows the instructions to a T and soon receives a message from Vincent telling him they've been watching him and that the whole world is rooting for him. He promises they're working on rescue plans and that they'll set a supply mission to feed it. When Mark asks about his crew, Vincent has to explain they haven't told them he's alive yet because they need them to concentrate on their return flight. Mark isn't happy about this and begins sending lots of curse words to ruin the global broadcast. Teddy has to speak to higher-ups and convince them Mark only acted like that because of stress, but Mitch convinces him to go behind Vincent's back and contact the crew. It's been 4 months since they left Mars and the team is surprised to find a video message for all of them. The astronauts gather around the screen and watch Mitch's video dropping the big news. Just as predicted, everyone feels guilty for leaving Mark behind. On day 128, Mark shares on his log how NASA keeps asking for updates on even the smallest things, and now they want to micromanage his crops as if he didn't know what he was doing. He's also received lots of emails, including one from the president and another one from his university. They said that once you grow crops somewhere, you've officially colonized it. So Mark announces he's colonized Mars. During the next transmission, NASA asks Mark to pose for a picture and Annie gets angry because he tries to be funny instead of doing something graceful for the press. Teddy tells her to post it anyway, together with an announcement about sending him supplies in around 9 months. Food should last him until then, but Teddy worries something may go wrong. One night, Mark finishes doing some maintenance outside and goes back into the hab. However, there's a malfunction and the pressure causes a hole in the wall. Suddenly, there's a small explosion and the airlock flies off, rolling around for a while until it crashes. Mark survives the incident, but there's a breach in his suit and he's losing oxygen. He uses tape to cover all the cracks and reseals the suit just in time. Then Mark returns to the hab and is devastated to discover the explosion burned all his plants. After grabbing some supplies, he goes to spend the night in the rover, where he yells in frustration before messaging Earth. At NASA, Vincent informs the others that the remaining food gives Mark around 200 days. Teddy immediately sends out orders to make everyone work faster on the supply probe. To keep him distracted, NASA connects Mark's signal to the Hermes and now they can message each other too. The next day, Mark cleans out the garden and seals the hole caused by the explosion. That night he tries rationing the remaining potatoes, but hearing another storm outside just makes his stress worse. On Earth, astrodynamicist Rich discusses the probe's travel time with a coworker. He makes a joke about Earth and Mars being badly positioned, and this inspires an idea. Meanwhile, Teddy keeps trying to find spots in protocol where they cut time to get things done faster. On day 154, Mark has brought down his meals to the bare minimum and starts mixing them with medicine. 4 weeks later, the probe is finally ready and everyone at NASA gathers to watch the launch. At first it appears to go well, but soon they discover a very large procession and in just a few minutes, the probe blows up. The mood immediately drops in the room and Vincent has the hard mission of telling Mark when he asks for an update. On day 186, Mark sends Melissa a message asking her to check on his parents when she returns to Earth and tell them everything about their time on Mars. He wants them to know he loves them and that he died doing something greater than himself, which he's proud of. Meanwhile, the China National Space Administration watches Teddy during an interview explaining the probe failed because they cut time on the inspections. China has a more advanced booster that could help NASA do a faster launch, but it's always been classified information. So if they help, they need to keep it private and nobody in the world would know. Soon Teddy gets a call from them and he agrees to the confidentiality deal. While the NASA engineers try to get another probe done in 28 days, Rich finishes his calculations and flies to see Vincent to tell him he has a better plan. Vincent organizes a meeting and Rich does a visual demonstration of his plan using a stapler, Annie, and Teddy. Instead of sending the probe directly to Mars, they can use the Chinese booster to make it intercept Hermes. The crew can pick up the supplies and fly around Earth in a slingshot effect that will keep the speed and quickly send them back to Mars to rescue Mark, who will have to meet them in the MAV. However, this would add 500 more days to the crew's mission. Mitch thinks Melissa and the others should be allowed to decide if they want to do it or not, but Teddy doesn't want to risk losing an entire team and announces they'll stick to their original plan instead of Rich's. On the Hermes, Beth discovers an encrypted message and decodes it to discover Rich's plan. The crew gathers to discuss what they should do, and Melissa takes a moment to remind everyone of the consequences. They won't see their families for another year, and since it counts as mutiny, they'll be court-martialed. Not to mention the slingshot may go wrong and kill them all. However, the crew doesn't hesitate to vote in favor of doing it. At NASA, they receive a message from Beth with a joke about Rich before they notice the Hermes flying off course. Teddy has no choice but to send Annie to talk to the press to tell them about their new plan. He also guesses Mitch sent Hermes the information in secret and tells him that after this mission is over, he'll have to resign. On day 219, Mark starts working on modifying the rover since he'll need to carry lots of stuff to survive the trip to the crater where this other MAV is located. NASA runs the same tests in their labs and sends him updated information to help him along. The Chinese scientists come to the NASA offices to work on the booster, although there are many communications problems because of language and culture. The Hermes crew calls their families to inform them they'll have to wait 500 more days to meet again. Eventually, the rover is ready and Mark gives it a ride to confirm everything is working correctly. The new booster is also successfully tested and a probe launches without issues. The Hermes finds it near Earth and the crew attaches it to the ship. 7 months later, Mark finally gets ready to leave. He records his final log and turns off all the systems in the hab. Then he marks day 461 on the wall and signs it before getting in the rover. There's a long journey ahead of him and he has to stop regularly to recharge the rover using the solar panels he took from the hab. He uses those moments to admire the landscape and remind himself he's the first person visiting most of those places. During charging time, he also takes his naps. On day 517, Mitch and the engineers discover an issue. The Hermes can't enter Mars orbit because it'd leave them without enough fuel to come home. The MAV can only get to low orbit, so Mark will need to go extra fast to escape gravity. To achieve this, they have to make the MAV 5,000 kilograms lighter. Mitch thinks they can remove things like seats, control panels, and even some of the survival system. Mark would have to wear a suit to breathe, and the Hermes crew would pilot the MAV remotely without backup comms. To make matters worse, they'd have to remove the nose airlock and the windows to cover the top of the MAV with canvas instead. There are too many risk factors that give this mission a high chance of failure, but they don't have any other choice. When they send the plan to Mark, he responds with the F word. On day 538, Mark finally makes it to the crater and records one more log ranting about the lunacy of the plan. However, he also admits he likes how becoming the fastest man in the history of space travel sounds. Then he starts working on all the modifications, removing all the parts of the MAV until he's left with the bare essentials and making sure to cover the top with canvas. On day 560, Melissa goes over the plan to rescue Mark, assigning each crew member a job to make sure it goes well. If something fails, they're willing to jump off the Hermes to go after their friend. The next day, Mark eats the last of his food supply and leaves a note for the astronaut who finds the rover in the future, telling them to take care of it because it saved his life. On Earth, people are gathering outside the NASA building and in the streets of big cities around the world to watch the rescue mission. After shaving his beard and cutting his hair, Mark puts on the suit and finally gets in the MAV. Now that the Hermes is close enough, they can communicate with Mark through the comms instead of sending texts, and he cries as he thanks his friends for coming back for him. Melissa does the countdown and the MAV takes off without any trouble. However, after just a few minutes of flying, the canvas is blown off and the pressure changes in the cabin, making Mark dizzy until he passes out. The Hermes remotely shuts down the booster and discovers that the MAV is out of fuel, which leaves it further from the main ship than planned. The crew can fix this by using some of their backup fuel, however, that will make the speed go too fast for interception. At that moment, Mark wakes up and tells them he's fine if they don't count his broken ribs. When he hears about the problem, he proposes a new plan. He could pierce his suit and use the escaping air as a thruster to fly toward the Hermes. It's a bad plan, but it inspires Melissa with a similar idea. They could blow off an airlock and the escaping air would give them the kick they need. It's very risky, but they're out of options, so Melissa calls Alex and asks him to start making a bomb. Using the ship's supplies, including simple sugar, Alex makes a bomb stronger than dynamite. Frisk sets it up on the airlock before floating away. In the cockpit, the calculations reveal that there still will be a small difference in distance, so Melissa announces she'll go out and rushes to suit up. When the bomb finally explodes, the airlock is destroyed and creates the desired effect. Once the Hermes is as close to the MAV as possible, Chris hooks Melissa up so she can go on a spacewalk to rescue Mark. Unfortunately, the rope isn't long enough, so Mark gets to do his own idea. He pierces his suit and the air immediately begins pushing him around. He struggles to take control but eventually manages to fly out of the MAV. With her crew doing the calculations, Melissa fixes her course and reaches out to grab Mark when he passes by. However, he's going too fast and their hands only bump. Thankfully, he manages to hold onto the rope and Melissa begins pulling until they can finally reunite. The crew pulls them in before informing Earth that the mission went well and everyone around the world celebrates. Once Mark has recovered from this experience and is healthy again, he becomes a survival instructor for astronaut candidates. 3 years later, a new mission to Mars is successfully launched. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.